We love the idea of the natural. When we see someone at the absolute pinnacle of their field, our instinct is to credit genetics rather than process. We look at an athlete like Michael Jordan and assume he was simply born to fly. We do the exact same thing with intelligence. We picture a brilliant mind like Albert Einstein and assume his brain was just wired differently from the start. We treat greatness like a lottery ticket. But building an identity entirely around unearned raw talent creates a hidden fragility. If you believe your abilities are carved in stone, the moment you hit a wall you can't effortlessly vault over, you freeze. Instead of trying to figure out the problem, the immediate reaction is panic. The brain goes into self-defense mode. People start making excuses, blaming the conditions, or they just quit entirely. Because if trying hard means you aren't a natural genius, it's safer to stop trying. Stanford psychologist Dr. Carol Dweck noticed this exact pattern of self-sabotage, and she spent decades trying to figure out what was really driving human achievement. Looking at this list of Dweck's peer-reviewed publications, the data tells a compelling story. Her research tracks thousands of subjects over decades, analyzing exactly how they handle failure. The research suggests that even with a high IQ or natural physical gifts, success remains elusive if the brain is treated as a finished product. Mindset acts as the operating system that determines how much of that raw capacity is actually put to work. Dweck categorizes two operating systems. First, the fixed mindset, the belief that intelligence and character are dealt at birth. In this rigid state, effort feels like a threat. Struggling proves you lack the gift. The alternative, the growth mindset, assumes skill can be cultivated. This framework detaches failure from personal identity. In a growth mindset, missing a deadline or failing a test is an event to be analyzed, a temporary action, rather than a permanent label that defines you. These two opposing worldviews dictate how we navigate the world. They decide whether we shrink away from challenges just to look smart, or whether we actually lean into the struggle to get smarter. So how do we end up with one system instead of the other? The answer traces back to early childhood development, specifically the feedback we receive from adults. Dweck designed a foundational experiment. She gave elementary school children a series of puzzles to solve. When they succeeded, she split the young kids into two groups and gave them two very distinct types of praise. The first group was praised for their innate ability. They were told, "Wow, you solved that so fast. You must be really smart." When offered a second round of puzzles, these kids deliberately chose easier ones. They wanted to protect their status as geniuses. Taking a risk meant they might look dumb. The second group was praised for the process. They were told, "Wow, you worked really hard." When these kids were offered the next round, they actively sought out the harder puzzles, chasing the thrill of stretching their abilities. Decades later, that exact same childhood conditioning scales up to the boardroom. It separates the corporate executive who covers up mistakes to maintain an aura of perfection and a leader who openly confronts brutal truths to adapt the business. By handing out well-intentioned compliments about natural gifts, we accidentally wire people for fragility. Praising the work they put in builds a foundation of resilience. As Dweck's theory gained mainstream popularity, it started getting simplified, and over time, those simplifications morphed into genuine misunderstandings within schools and corporate training seminars. This sparked a very fair wave of criticism. You can find plenty of readers, like in this one-star book review, calling out the toxic positivity of the movement. They point out the ridiculousness of telling people that if they just try hard enough, they are guaranteed to become an Olympic athlete or a billionaire. Dweck herself acknowledges this trap. She calls it the false growth mindset, the widespread and dangerous misconception that success requires nothing more than sheer brute force effort. This leads to what psychologists call effort gone awry. It happens when people blindly repeat the exact same ineffective strategies, convinced that if they just bang their head against the wall a little harder, things will eventually work out. Praising someone for empty effort when they aren't actually learning anything doesn't create mastery. It creates a highly motivated cycle of endless frustration. This visualization maps out the complete equation for how growth actually functions. A true growth mindset requires hard work, yes, but it also requires the willingness to test new strategies and the humility to ask for input from others. When you inevitably hit a plateau, working harder isn't enough. The most critical component of the equation is the pivot. You have to be willing to abandon a failing strategy and try a completely different approach. We also have to acknowledge the reality of biological and environmental limits. Having a growth mindset does not magically erase those constraints, and it certainly doesn't guarantee you will become the undisputed best in the world at your chosen field. While we all have limits, no one can accurately predict where a person's ceiling actually is until it's been pushed against for years. A growth mindset offers something more valuable than guaranteed success: the permission to stop capping your own potential. It removes the fear of looking foolish, leaving you free to find out how far your efforts can actually take you.